Welcome back, everyone. Today we're doing another gear review for my fellow content creators. I'm going back and visiting one of my most popular gear reviews ever, the Edelkrone SliderONE Pro V2. I get a lot of comments and concerns on it, and now, since having it for a little over a year, I'd like to do a year in review about how it's changed in my workflow and how crucial it really is to me now. Let's jump right in. Thanks for joining us again, everyone. And if you have not seen my very first video, check the link up at the top. It goes over what I think about this thing for real estate videography when I first got it. Now, over time, those opinions have changed because I've actually changed my workflow and suited it for this slider as opposed to just any slider as I had it before. Now, I'll go over some of the issues I had with it originally, and I'll talk about how those have changed kind of one by one. The first thing I want to talk about is what I considered my biggest issue with it before, and now I actually consider it amazing, and that is how slow it is. For real estate photography, I originally thought it was too slow. So my issue that I had is as it was moving slowly, it would capture fans and I would have to speed up the footage in post to make it look like it was moving at all. And the fan would look like it was going superhero speed up top. And that was causing really big issues for me. Now, I loved how steady and smooth each of the shots were and how they lined up next to each other. They looked very, very cohesive. So what I started doing instead of turning the fan on, I basically turn it on for just a second so it barely starts spinning. It's going super slow. And then I turn it right back off, start up my slider, it rock and rolls, and when I speed up the footage in post to about 200%, it looks perfect. They still end up looking buttery smooth, unlike before when they would look superhero mode, because I just really wasn't accustomed to the piece of gear. So like I said before, I thought it moved too slow, but realistically, I just had to kind of change my workflow around how slow it moved, and now the videos are smoother and crisper than ever before. Now, I think this is really useful because when I'm shooting videos indoors, unlike when I'm using a gimbal and I have to shoot 60 frames a second, 120 frames a second, 240 frames a second sometimes, your shutter speed has to go up drastically with each of those, making the interior spaces darker and darker throughout the process. Now, this thing moving super butter slow allows me to actually crank up my aperture a little bit, put it down to 30 frames a second, and bump down that shutter speed, enhancing the brightness inside of the room and decreasing the amount of grain, which allows my camera to produce really crisp and very free of grain images. To continue on, let's talk about the next issue I brought up in my last video, and that was the issue with the updates on it. Now, I actually ended up getting a personal message from the company stating that this is something that they were looking into and it's something that they fixed. You no longer have to do the update in order to use it. It's your choice, which is amazing. I've never once since got on a job site and had to stand around and wait for this thing to update. That was a big gripe I had in the past, and I am so glad the company listened to the people that use the product and fixed that. It is the number one fix that they've done, and it was probably my number one issue with this thing in the past, just because it made me look unprofessional when I had to set up my gear and sit around and wait on it to update for 15 minutes. But as I said, they fixed that problem. I've never had it once since, and that is amazing. Now that we're all done with those, we're going to continue on and talk about the third issue that I addressed last time I talked about this slider. And that is the connectivity issue with the app on the phone. I had one major issue, and that is every time I put my phone into silent mode or like closed it just to move from room to room, I would have to reconnect to the slider. It doesn't seem like that big of an issue, but when you're moving around room to room and you move this slider 40 times inside of a house and you've got to wait a minute each time to connect, or even 30 seconds, that's 20 minutes that I had to wait to connect. But I'll tell you how I fixed that. And I should have done it originally, but I actually bought the remote that goes with it. Let me put this up nice and close for you so you can see it. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on real quick. Boom. This thing is incredible. Since purchasing this guy, I have not had any of those issues I was just talking about. It has its very own LCD screen, which is incredible. It has its own settings. It works just like the app, but the best part is when it goes into sleep mode, and it does go into sleep mode to save battery, which is nice, but when it goes into sleep mode, you don't have to reconnect the two or repair the two. They stay paired, which is nice because now I can move around an entire property as many times as I need to and do what I need to do. Another reason this remote is super slick for me, if we go back to my original issue we were talking about with the ceiling fans. Sometimes ceiling fans don't have a low mode. Sometimes they're attached to the light, so you have to turn them all the way off or all the way on. There's some issues that occur. So what I actually do is I walk around and sometimes I just reach up as high as I can and barely tap the fan. So having the remote allows me to walk up, barely tap the fan, just walk out of frame, push the button, and it starts sliding for me. Doesn't matter where I'm at. I don't have to be right next to it to start it. I guess I could do that with the phone as well, but before I had so many connectivity issues with the phone that I just kept the phone right next to it to make sure it never disconnected and I never had to reconnect it to deal with that issue. This thing goes everywhere, and when it's actually moving, it has the little sliding screen right across the top, so it tells you how long. It's got so many cool little buttons. It has every option you would need on it. So what I'm saying is, if you purchase this slider, once again, let's just say this is mine, actually. This top part is just a ball head gimbal that I use for my video work. It does not come with the slider. But if you were to purchase this video for real estate purposes, I would highly recommend spending the extra $120 and getting the remote. I know this thing right here is not very cheap, so when you're buying something to go with it, it's kind of hard to justify that extra $120. But in the long run, it will save you so much grief and headache. Please get the remote to go with it. Now that we've talked about all that stuff, I'd really go over a few new things that I actually really like about it. I put a quick disconnect on the bottom now, so whenever I'm doing kitchens, I can also get a shot where this thing just sets perfectly right on the island, and just like before, I can get really up close macro shots of this thing slow sliding around. I used to do it with a gimbal, and I would do kind of like the spin move that everyone likes, but now I've kind of transitioned that move into kind of like this push through the water effect, if you will. And it allows me to keep using one piece of gear so I don't have to set up my gimbal unless absolutely necessary. I use my gimbal mainly now for exterior shoots only. I very rarely use it inside unless it's a large space or it has some kind of unique layout feature that I'm trying to address with a walk-through motion that's just impossible to do with a slider. But 95% of what I do inside of a house is all done with this slider now. I used to be a huge proponent of the wing slider. That will be the next video I'll be getting into, and I'll tell you why. Originally, if you watch my two videos, I kind of hated this thing because it was so slow, and I loved the wing because of its like tactile response. I love the way it feels. And I'm not saying I don't like the wing. I do really still like it for specific purposes, and I do still use it. But this has actually become my number one, and we'll go over that in next week's video about the wing in particular and how it rates up and compares to this now since I've changed my workflow. As I mentioned in the beginning, I keep saying the word workflow. It's important that you have a workflow. It's important that you have a sort of continuity from house to house. I realize not all houses are the same. Not all houses have the same layout. But if you look through my work, it's very clear that the style is prevalent. Traditionally speaking, I do 3 front exteriors, then I do the opening the door into the house. Everything else is interior. I do 1 back deck or back porch video and then 3 more exterior shots. If they have a large deck or porch, one of those 3 exterior shots gets taken up by another deck shot, or if it's a larger property, they add more time to the video. All of my videos are based around a 1-minute turnout time. So I produce a video that's around 1 minute long for my agents, and that's my base price I'm starting at. That's just kind of how I personally do things. Everyone has their own way of doing it, but that's how I rate it. So the more that they actually get from me, the more I kind of do. And I know that doesn't really make sense, but let me explain to you. So if you get just a regular video, no drone, no extra footage, no nothing, you're going to get basically all slider and the gimbal outside. But I would much prefer to use the drone outside. They're cleaner shots than the gimbal. My gimbal may produce a little bit more of a wide angle shot for very certain situations, but generally speaking, videos look cooler starting from the drone shot moving into the house, so you also get a view of the neighborhood. That is my optimum video. But I realize not all agents want to showcase the neighborhood that they're in, and I realize that all agents are working off of that strict budget that I talk about in every one of my videos. So it's very important to think about your client's budget, which is why I offer the video without drone services, because that saves them roughly $85 in the video and photo production stages. Now, granted, obviously I would love to make that extra $85, but I would prefer to make a little money than no money at all from an agent that can't afford the upper echelon. That's just my personal 2 cents. That's how I run it, but that's because I'm always trying to provide as many products as possible to as many clients as possible so I can service them all and never have to send them anywhere else. This allows me to once again make the highest profit for not only myself, but for my entire team. Well, as always, I just kind of sat in front of the camera and rambled for a little while. I hope all this information was useful. I really hope you like the things I went over and reviewed. Once again, please, I would say go back and watch my first video. It's a little more detailed. Quality is not quite as good as this one. I've stepped up my whole studio game since then, but the information is still just as valid, and it does relate directly to the information I talked about earlier in this video. Now, as I like to always say, if you like the information I presented and the way I presented it, please press that like button, mash that subscribe button, and check me out next time.